welcome to the PeakDay podcast, where we explore the beauty of fertility, faith, and natural family planning with our friends. Today, I'm joined by Shannon Wendt, wife, homeschooling mom of 8 and soon to be 9, and founder of Choose Life and the Way of the Rosary community. Shannon's creativity and faith journey have inspired thousands to pray the Rosary daily and to see it not just as a devotion, but as a way of living with Jesus and Mary through every joy and cross of family life. We'll talk about her new book, The Way of the Rosary, how a season of suffering shaped her prayer life and her business, and the grace that can be found when we invite God and the Blessed Virgin Mary into the mystery of our own lives. Welcome, Shannon, to the PeakDay podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
So, just tell us a little bit about maybe meeting your husband and your early marriage, Shannon.
Sure. Yeah. So my husband and I met in our high school youth group. And yeah, we actually, the funny story is he wasn't a big fan of me at first. He was a couple of years older. I was a little bit younger, a little annoying. The only way that I knew to get boys' attention was, to prove to them that I wasn't a girly girl. And so I would punch him in the shoulder every time I saw him. So that got kind of old. So he kind of avoided me. Um, but eventually, uh, my husband was in seminary, and we had a mutual friend who started to develop a crush on me. I turned that friend down, but that friend was gushing to my husband, who was in seminary, like a safe friend, about how much he he thought of me. And my husband thought, oh, hmm, he's right. So we were helping out at our youth group, getting ready for a retreat, and kind of one by one, all of the other leaders left. It was just he and I left to finish setting up the retreat. We were there late, working on different things and trying to make small talk. And so I asked him, how's seminary going? And he says, oh, I don't know. I think I'm leaving. There's a girl. And so super nosy me spent the whole rest of the weekend trying to wiggle it out of him who it was. And it turns out it was me.
What a wonderful story. Oh, so during your engagement process, was it like a requirement to learn natural family planning? Did you know about it at all? What's your story with that?
Yeah, it was. We went through the CCL classes in our engagement, and my husband's best friend got married just a few months before us. And so, kind of funny, the NFP classes were going on at the same time as our youth group. So while he and I were helping to lead youth group, there was a few weeks in a row we saw our friends going over to the NFP class. And so, one day our friend, his name is Tim, just comes out and he's like, man, you just wait. And we're like, what? And so he makes the cervical mucus finger sign. He's like, you'll understand. You'll understand. I'm like, what are you even talking about? But yeah, sure enough, a couple months later, we figured it out.
Now, had your husband learned about it in seminary by that point, or was he that far along in his training?
No, he wasn't very far along. It was more of like a discernment house, really, more than like proper seminary. He was still in undergraduate studies, just kind of in a like living in a discernment house. So they didn't have a ton of formation, and it was something. Our youth group was just such an incredible blessing. We had a lot of young couples, just a little bit older than us, who were very open and, taught us really, as teenagers and young adults for the first time about the beauty of NFP, because it wasn't really something that either of our parents had experienced or um, taught us, and it wasn't something that was talked about really in the wider Catholic circles. So we were really blessed to be a part of that youth group and have those kind of mentor couples around us.
So we'll fast forward a little bit, and you've had a couple of children. So you've shared a little bit that about your journey back to daily prayer, especially the Rosary. And that began after a season of deep loss. Um, how did that experience shape your faith and your understanding of God's presence in times of suffering?
You know, I'd never really in my life experienced suffering. There wasn't anybody close to me who I lost, or there wasn't any, real difficulties outside of the kind of day to day things of growing up, nothing really hard. And I had this just misunderstanding, I think, of what it meant to be a follower of Jesus and what suffering really was. And so, when we got married, we were doing all the right things. We were open to life. We were raising our kids Catholic. We were going to mass weekly, sometimes daily during the week. We prayed together, all of the right things like we were just doing the right things and checking boxes. But what kind of began to happen in our life, in our early marriage and, with a young family, was we allowed just kind of the busyness of this new life and the busyness of raising children to really take the center of our lives. And this was, kind of true for both my husband and I. And we kind of edged the Lord out a little bit. It was, what brought us together. It was really, truly the foundation of our relationship. But just in the busyness, like nothing, no big major thing, but just in that kind of quiet busyness, we had just moved the Lord out of the center. And so when we went through a season of suffering, I actually had three miscarriages over the span of 11 months, one right after the other. And each one of those was a little bit further along, more and more medically complex, and the recoveries were just more and more drawn out. And that just left me in such a dark and angry place. Doing all the right things, I couldn't understand how a good father would allow something so awful. And I really, because of that like misunderstanding of what suffering was, I just kind of shoved the Lord out even farther. I didn't lose my faith entirely. I still believed that God was God and that everything in the Bible was true, that the Catholic Church was right. But I just didn't want to have a relationship with him anymore. And I kind of made this bargain with the Lord that, like, I'll continue to check the boxes, do the right things, raise my kids Catholic. And your end of the deal is that you just let me into heaven at the end so that I could see the little ones that I just ached to hold so desperately. And I kind of went through life for about a year and a half like this, just, continuing to go to mass and do the right things, but really no conversation, no relationship, no prayer life at all. And I just continued to spiral deeper and deeper into depression. And in this darkness, I really bought into a lot of the lies that Satan tries to sell us when, when he can get us out of the light of Christ and into that dark place. You know, I believed that the miscarriages were my fault, that they were things that I did wrong, that the Lord didn't really care about me in particular. He didn't care about my happiness, that he wasn't working for good in my life, that he was just distant and aloof and, all of these things. And after a while, I began to kind of feel this little nudge back to praying the daily rosary. It was a habit that I'd had all through high school and into college, and just in the busyness had kind of shoved it aside, kind of put it up on a shelf for that like vague someday when life is quiet and a little bit less distracting, which right, yeah, which never happens. It doesn't matter what season of life you're in, you're always busy, it's always crazy, there's always a reason not to pray. But I believed that, that we could just get back to it someday. And, so this tug at first just made me even more angry that the Lord thought that I should pray, that I could even pray, even if I wanted to, where was I going to find the time? And he began to get more and more persistent. And it's actually one of the first promises of the rosary is that Our Lady will send signal graces. And signal graces, if you're not familiar, that is like when the Lord takes a neon sign and puts it on the sidewalk of your life to point you at the thing that he wants you to know. And so I found a rosary prayer card in my locked car. I had people just randomly give me rosaries over and over and over again. I think maybe 4 or 5 times. One of them was a friend who wasn't even Catholic, just like, "I was cleaning out my grandma's desk and I thought that you should have this." And then kind of the straw that broke the camel's back was my 3-year-old at the time, just one day handed me my confirmation rosary. And I actually hadn't seen it in like 3 years. I thought we'd lost it in a move, and she wasn't able to tell me where she found it or, you know, where it came from, anything. And so at that point, I knew that I couldn't ignore what God was asking anymore, that He was definitely asking me to go back to the rosary. But I was still so angry, still not praying. But I had the first sort of prayer that I had in about a year and a half. And it was really just me yelling at the Lord. And in my mind's eye, this prayer was me just marching straight up the center aisle of the church and right up to the altar and kind of shaking my finger up at the crucifix. Like, how do you think I could possibly pray the rosary? I can't find any of my rosaries. If I did manage to find a rosary, my kids have probably already broken it. If I manage to find an intact rosary, they are definitely going to interrupt me. I'm never going to remember to pick up where I left off. So, what's the point? And I kind of felt like, see, I told you. But within a week of that, hardly a prayer, the Lord inspired the design of our rosary bracelets, which literally solved every single one of the excuses that I had. It's super sturdy, it's right on hand. And the really unique thing about it was that it has a movable crucifix charm that works like a bookmark. And so I began to be able to use the quiet moments throughout each day to pray, just at one Hail Mary at a time, or maybe an entire decade, depending on, just those moments. And at first, I had no real faith that this was actually going to change anything in my life. But I was also just so broken and desperate that I knew it couldn't hurt. And I knew the Lord was asking. And so, just kind of out of sort of begrudging obedience, maybe, I just began to pray. And at first, it took like a whole week maybe to get a rosary in. But it was just that little by little faithful progress that kind of opened the door to my heart just enough to let Our Lady really come in and to do what she does best. She is such a good mother. And that's what she wants to do for each one of us. She just wants to come in. That, doesn't our life doesn't have to be neat and tidy. You don't have to have everything all together. She just wants to come in. And, she wasn't the one that I was angry at. So it was easy to let her in and kind of begin that relationship with her. And then she really did just take me. And that's really where the way of the rosary comes from, kind of playing off the way of the cross. Because that's what I realized this journey. I wasn't alone in the dark like I thought I was. I was really on the way of the cross. And when you walk the way of the cross with your eyes open and you realize you don't walk this way alone, that you're walking this way, the saints have walked this way ahead of us. There's real life people who, are friends and family, or, authors or friends we meet online who have walked this way, are walking this road shoulder to shoulder. And Our Lady, our mother, walks every single step of this road with us. And that's really what the rosary is. The rosary is this relationship, this way to pray and think about the life of Jesus with Our Lady as we're walking through the sorrowful, joyful, glorious mysteries, luminous mysteries of our own lives, and really uniting everything we do to the life of Jesus. And that's, the way of the rosary. That's what Our Lady wants for us. She wants to be a mother. She wants to lead us to the heart of her son.
Right, right. That's what she's all about. Yeah, and it's easier to go to her than to go to God when you're mad at him, right? So you encountered the healing love of the Blessed Virgin Mary, and your husband was also on a journey as well. Was he able to heal spiritually as well?
Yeah. And really at this point, we were really grieving kind of in opposite directions. And I had kind of begun this slow journey of healing. I started praying the rosary, and having this, kind of, um, experience of peace and healing began to invite him into this too. And he really had no interest. He continued, to do the right things, go to mass. He didn't leave his faith, but he was really choosing to kind of numb the pain, pouring himself into his work, long, long hours at work, and also alcohol. Like he just wanted to kind of numb and escape in that way. And as I continued to pray, and he not totally rejected it, but was like, yeah, no, not right now, kind of. Um, I began praying for him, and I gave him a rosary bracelet. So, the kind of this is also the genesis of Choose Life. Before this, I had just an Etsy shop with kind of generic stuff, and put the rosary bracelet. Actually, the very one that I made, took a picture of that. I had like extra beads, so could have made a few more. So I took a picture of the actual one that I was wearing, and it, those began to sell quickly. I designed other ones. I designed one for my husband, gave it to him, and he would wear it but never actually prayed it. And what I did was design one for myself that was kind of the mirror image of the one that I made for him. And that was my reminder to pray for him. And so now, as I'm going throughout my day, kind of slip my rosary bracelet off, in between homeschool lessons, or in between, running the kids around or chasing them, all the things that I was doing. And I would just, kind of bead by bead, pray a little bit. And my husband would see me from across the room, just, pause my prayer as it, needed two hands to grab a kid or something, clip that little charm on there. And he said it was like a dagger to his heart. He knew every time he saw me slip that rosary bracelet back on, that I was praying for him, and that he was not really stepping up into the role as spiritual leader like he was being called to do. And it took a little while, and it took a persistent friend inviting him into Exodus 90, that yeah, and that was really for him. That season of Exodus 90 and that solid group of friends allowed him to really find a lot of healing. And part of the asceticisms of Exodus 90 is to pray a daily rosary. So he's kind of like, I have this brand new idea. Why don't we pray the rosary as a family? I was like, phenomenal. Why didn't I think of that sooner?
I loved how you stated in the book how, when he was with this group of men, it was steel sharpening steel. That's so powerful that, having that group of like minded men is just so very important for men to, progress in their spiritual life.
Yeah, it was. And for them, it was such a good, just like, intimate is probably not a good way to describe a men's group. They probably wouldn't appreciate that, but they were able to be really real. It was a small group of good friends, and they were able to really talk about their wounds, and how they were escaping and hiding, and really address together some of the big things that were holding them back from being the men that God created them to be. And yeah, for him, that was really kind of the beginning of his journey back as well.
You just described the rosary a little bit ago as a way of life. So, for somebody who may see it only like as a repetitive prayer, what does it mean to live the rosary? And how has that transformed your spiritual life and your family life?
Yeah, I think it really starts with just beginning. And in the beginning, if we are just kind of repeating the prayers just to check the box and to get it done, I still think that that is a good place to start. I think the very first thing to know about the rosary is that it's important to just begin. Contemplation and understanding, hearing the Lord's voice comes with time. It comes with spending time together. It comes with persistence, and it isn't, it's something that we all wish we could just like flip a switch, and that, every prayer we have, every moment that we have with the Lord would be beautiful and wonderful, and, you know, bells and incense and all of that. And the reality is that we just have to start somewhere. And so that's the beginning. Like, just do it. Just begin. Pray it messy, pray it distracted, whatever it looks like, just begin. Because the reality is, the only ineffective rosary is the one that we never start. And so when we have these big ideas about what it should be, and we let that kind of deter us from praying something that we feel like is less than, then we never get to where the Lord is really calling us. And so, first of all, just begin. And then pray in those quiet moments. We can, as Catholics, kind of think about the rosary, or really anything, a lot of aspects of our faith. We really, as Catholics, I think, struggle with perfectionism. And really, with the rosary, there are so many different ways to pray. And we can even kind of disqualify, this little by little rosary throughout the day because we could think, oh, it's better to contemplate for 20 minutes and to really, and yes, like having 20 solid minutes to pray, yeah, it would be great and it's beautiful. And you should try to do that sometimes. But the reality is that is hard every day. But when we can pray in those quiet moments, it's not a less than perfect rosary. What really begins to happen is that we are surrounding every task that we're engaged in, every relationship, every conversation, every problem that we have, every joy, every suffering, every single aspect of our day, we're surrounding with the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. And that way, we really get to understand and relate the mysteries to our own lives. We begin to kind of recognize bits and pieces of that in the things that we are going through, and in that, we're really walking with Our Lady. We're letting her into our life. We're showing her through all the moments, all the ups and downs, and the ins and outs. And she really can become a true mother to us when we pray in that kind of little by little way throughout every single day.
So let's talk a little bit more about your Choose Life company. Um, from it started as kind of a nursing bracelet, wasn't it? That the first design that you had, the little reminder charm to remind you, yes, I've nursed this many times during the day. So and now you've got this excuse proof rosary bracelet, right? So what lessons have you learned about trusting God's timing, like in your personal vocation and in your business life?
Yes. I mean, the Lord's timing really is such a lesson, and it's, an ongoing lesson. I feel like that is something I will have to be learning for the rest of my life because I'm impatient. I'm a doer. I think I'm just a natural born entrepreneur. I've always kind of been inclined this way. And, when it comes to problems, I can create a solution and, a plan. We can work through it and overcome something. And I really, kind of take that doer attitude into my life in a lot of ways. And in some ways it's been very beneficial. Like, we can come up with a plan and we can solve things that, other people are daunted by. But I also do that with the Lord. And, there'll be a problem or something and like, okay, Lord, here is our 4-step plan for getting this accomplished. Like, let's go team. And, in particular, there was a season last last summer that was just rough. Like there was a lot, like it just felt like everything within the business was harder and more expensive than it used to be. And, you know, where before I was able to kind of work just part-time beginning last summer, everything was kind of all hands on deck and it was just a season of a lot of work. And at the beginning of this, there was kind of one thing. There was something that, if this thing just worked out, everything else would be fine. Like none of these other things that we were working out would be a problem anymore. And so at the beginning of this season, I felt the Lord really asking me to pray for daily bread. And so I began every morning looking at my entire day ahead and every aspect of the day, every task, every meeting, everything we needed to do with the kids, all of our errands and chores and everything. I tried to just be very detailed and look at the day ahead and intentionally give every single thing over to the Lord and ask for daily bread in each of those. And I prayed that way for a couple months. And then at the National Eucharistic Congress, the Lord asked me to start praying for abundance. And throughout the season, like it just continued to be difficult and hard. And, when the Lord said abundance, I was like, yes, okay, it's about time. Like, I am done with the scraping by of daily bread. I am here for abundance. And so I began to pray in that same way, but instead of asking for daily bread for every single thing, I prayed for abundance in everything. But the season continued to be hard. It was just, continued to kind of be one thing after another, and like everything was hard. Everything was taking longer, costing more than it used to. And there was one day we were getting ready. The next day we had to leave for a conference, and our big van, the vehicle that we used to pack up all of our stuff and, drive everybody and all the things to the conference to set up our booth, was having issues. It was in the shop. One of our other vehicles had already been in the shop for a while. And so between all the adults in our family, we have a bunch of kids who are driving, my husband and I, we were down to one car shared between us. And so it was an afternoon. I had an appointment. My husband had to go do something else. So he was running late to pick me up from that appointment. So I was going to walk a block down the road and meet him at the grocery store. And as I'm walking from my appointment to the grocery store, it starts to pour, like torrential downpour, like no warning. It wasn't, just barely cloudy, not a sprinkle in the sky, and then downpour. And I still had like, more than half a block to go. And, just kind of laughing to myself a little bit, I think it's St. Teresa of Avila who got knocked from her horse. And then she said to the Lord, Lord, if this is how you treat your friends, it's no wonder you have so few. That definitely crossed my mind. But then a little bit more seriously, I said, Lord, this does not feel like abundance. And he said to me very clearly and confidently in the quiet of my heart, he said, abundance is hidden in trials in the same way that I am hidden in the bread. And I was just, overwhelmed at the gift of that word and the truth of that. And then, of course, and just, the crazy way that the Lord works, that, we got the car back, we packed it all up, went to the conference. Scott Hahn was speaking at the conference that weekend. And, he admitted, like, I wanted to start talking about our Father a little bit. We're going a little bit off script. And he started talking about the line, give us this day our daily bread. And he talked about, isn't it kind of funny that, it seems redundant, this day, our daily bread. And he explained that the word daily in daily bread means the word is super usios. I might be saying that wrong. I never studied Greek, but it means super substantial or abundant bread. So give us this day our abundant bread. And I was just floored at how clear the Lord was being. And when I looked back at that season, all of the things that I was worried about, everything, all the budgets and all of the projects and everything that we were doing that seemed so tight, so difficult, it was all working out. And no, that big thing that we are looking at hadn't happened, but it ended up being this miracle of daily bread. And I could look back and see how everything was being taken care of. And sometimes in kind of natural ways that, had I not been looking, I wouldn't have even seen. But I was able to really see how the Lord was really just piece by piece putting so many things together. And then eventually, a couple of months down the road, that big thing that we were looking for eventually came. And you know what? It did not solve all of the problems in one swoop like I thought it would. And I looked, and all the things that the Lord had been doing were really the solution, that we needed all of it. And we needed to go through this time of moving things around and getting all of the pieces right. And all the little things were actually the necessary thing. And I think so often when we walk through this journey of life, we feel like the solution is very obvious. And we pray and we pray and we pray for that thing. And very often, that thing that we're praying for is a good thing. And it seems like the Lord also should want this good thing. But our sight can be so limited. We don't see so many things that the Lord is orchestrating and working. And when we get our heart set, and that was my problem kind of in the beginning, I was just praying for healing and praying for these little ones to make it earthside. And not that it isn't the Lord's will for life, but that the Lord provided and cared for and took care of so many things beyond my singular hope, that he really is working a longer game. And he never promised to be our flood lamp all the way down the road. He promised to be the lamp unto our feet. And, talking about trust and timing, like just being able to trust that he'll light the next right step the moment that we need to take it is, just a very beautiful challenge.
Yeah, yeah. And your daily prayers, I think were probably the foundation that was laid for you to enable you to be able to see that bigger picture in hindsight. Whereas maybe if you hadn't developed that, rhythm of prayer, that daily prayer, you might not have seen all of those little things that added up to be the big thing that you really needed.
Yeah. And, I give a lot of credit to Saint Therese. I think her little way is really encouraging for those of us, you know, all of us are counted in this. We all struggle. We're all not who we want to be, and that can feel discouraging. And the little way of Saint Therese of understanding the way she puts it is, I only have need to be little and more so. And that's something we can do. And realizing that, the path to becoming holy, to becoming the saint that we were created to be, is actually not to become holier. The path to holiness is actually to become littler. And the more I learn that lesson, the more I'm able to just kind of surrender or go to the Lord with all of my prayers, all of my concerns, like the real things. We don't have to, go with rose colored glasses and, just smile about all the crosses that we have to carry. But when we do carry them and we give them back to the Lord with open hands, where our hands are open to receive. And, I think when we cling to that one specific prayer that we have, or that exact timeline that we're set on, we're really just like holding on to that thing so tightly that the Lord can't give us the things that we really need. Our hands are closed. He's never going to force us. And that posture of surrender and acceptance and littleness really allows the Lord to do really big things in our lives.
So, like practically speaking, for someone who might have a business idea or have a Catholic idea for something, what kind of advice would you have for them on how to get started?
There's a couple of big lessons that I've learned in business, and really systematizing things and leveraging are probably the two most important ones. Um, I think in the very beginning, if we're even going to back up a little bit more, probably the very important thing is market testing. And we've got, friends or, even online Facebook groups, and kind of, you know, make sure that this product that you really love, that you want to create, is something that your target market wants and is willing to spend, whatever it would cost for you to be able to create it. So kind of doing that kind of testing, I think, um, saves us a bit of grief, or like, just kind of banging our head against the wall, wondering why things don't work. Understanding, first of all, who our audience is and how we can really solve needs for them. That's, I think, the most important and foundational thing. And then once you kind of have, the right product and the right market combination, begin even in the very beginning, before you've got a big business or you have a team, begin by systematizing things. And I am not naturally an organized person, not a type A bone in my body. But having to kind of learn the hard way how difficult it is to like go back and, re-engineer systems and organization into things, I realized that starting from the beginning in an organized way, with your finances, with your materials, with your marketing efforts, all of those things, and do it very simply. You don't have to over engineer it, because there's also the trap of just getting so bogged down in the org, especially for those who are very kind of organizationally minded. They would really love all of the spreadsheets and all of the analytics and all of that. You can get stuck there. So you also have to be careful. But, being organized with what you have and adding new products, or, going into different markets or launching on a different platform like Etsy or Shopify or TikTok Shop or any of the other things, doing so in kind of an organized fashion, kind of master one thing first or get something to, at least like 70%, where you would like it to be, and then move into something else. That kind of systematic approach to growth, I think really helps. And the other is leverage. Being able to bring people into your company to help grow things is essential. Yeah, you can do it all, but when your focus or you're spending time packing and shipping orders instead of doing the marketing or being the face of your brand, creating content, talking to your audience, when you're doing not doing those things that only you are capable of doing, the business will really stagnate. Um, and that's something for me. One of the first, actually, like the first business goal I had back when my shop was just kind of generic, the nursing bracelet that you mentioned, and I had like knit things. My business goal was to make $250 a month so that I could hire a cleaning lady to come twice a month and help me get on top of things. And I know it was phenomenal, and it immediately helped me to recognize the importance of leverage because in that couple of hours a month that she would come over and help get me, caught back up with all of my chores, I was able to spend more time with my kids doing the really important things, spend more time on marketing and growing my business, and then my sales, like, we quickly surpassed $250 a month, and we were making, thousands of dollars a month within just a few months of me being able to essentially buy back a few hours of my week. And and also she was really good at that and enjoyed cleaning, and she was able to get done in 2 hours a week what would take me 8 hours to do. And so, I was really very literally buying back my time. And so in our business, that's what we do every time we can kind of pass something off, and we do do it very um thoughtfully, mind your budget, don't hire when you can't afford it. But even if it stretches you, but that having that leverage is going to allow you to increase sales. Like sometimes as a business owner, you have to kind of take that risk and make that jump and then really focus on growing while they're doing those things, that you no longer have to do. And so product market fit, I think, is the first one. Systematize as you go, and then leverage hiring people to do things that so that you can focus on those most important aspects of your business.
So, about your book, the Way of the Rosary, um, uh, there are a lot of books about the Rosary, right? So, why was it important for you to write this book? And why do you think that you were inspired to write it?
Yeah, I I definitely set out to make sure that this book was not just another rosary book, because you're absolutely right. There are so many. I mean, you go to any Catholic bookstore and there's going to be an entire section that, are all rosary books, Marian books. And I wanted to help kind of meet a need that I saw within our church, within our community. And that's, we all know that the rosary is a good idea. And we all, or a lot of us, have this guilt about, that knowledge. We know it's good and we don't quite put it into practice. And we have all of these reasons that kind of get in our way. We have all of these excuses, and it's really hard to develop that habit. And especially that guilt about that pulls us down even farther. It just is really a tool of the devil to keep us from doing something good. And I recognize that we overcomplicate it in a lot. And we overcomplicate, I think, holiness in general, like I mentioned. We focus so much on doing more things to become holier, when really the answer is just to be little and to be childlike. And St. Louis de Montfort calls relationship with Mary, I might mix the quote up a little bit, but the surest, straightest, and most perfect path to holiness. And it's in a really interesting little book that he wrote called The Secrets of Mary. And in this book, he begins that book by saying, I have very little time to write, and I know you have very little time to read, so I'm going to get straight to the point. And he talks about, wanting to help us to understand this sure, straight, and perfect path to holiness. But then he kind of elaborates about how difficult it is, what it takes to be holy, detachment from sin, and, all he just like, it's this long laundry list of all of these incredibly difficult things. But then he tells us it's the grace of God. And because we, as children of Mary, can tap into the merits of our mother, that we can accomplish these otherwise impossible things. And that really is the crux of all of it. Our Lady wants to be a very good mother to us. She wants to walk through the mysteries of our own life and lead us through the mysteries of the life of her Son so that we can be more surely united to him and our path can be straighter. And the perfection that we think that we need is actually achievable because we live that out through our perfect and sinless mother. And we have access to her treasure trove of graces, her merits, because we are her little children. And when we understand that more, you think about, as a mother, we think about like all of the wonderful things. If somebody gave us a great box of chocolates, the doorbell rings and we get this beautiful box full of chocolates. I mean, we might, we might be very tempted to go to our room and keep them all to ourselves. Right. But Our Lady, who is much more generous than us, of course, what does she do? She opens this box wide for all of her children and she asks us to take a bite. And that is exactly what she does for us when we are her children. She just opens her treasure trove, and all of her merits are also accessible to us. And we can make progress on this path to holiness in a much more simple way, straighter and more perfect than we could even imagine, than we can even fathom doing on our own. And so, by praying little by little, by leaning in and becoming more and more childlike, Our Lady really can carry us straight to the heart of her Son.
I love how you put it, how we can tap into the merits of Mary. That's that's profound. Beautiful. Thank you for that. So many of us can feel like spiritually dry and distracted and discouraged. Like you said, we make prayer this big obstacle or unattainable goal in our minds. We do it to ourselves a lot, especially busy parents. And so you mentioned just starting the rosary, just picking it up and saying, one Hail Mary. What other maybe small steps can help somebody rediscover the rosary or discover the rosary as a source of that peace and that grace that we so need in our lives?
I think, you know, we can pray the rosary in our head. We can, we've got a lot of really wonderful apps that we can pray the rosary with. And all of those things are good and useful. I'm not, going to say anything negative about any of that. Do those things. But I think it's very important to have physical reminders. And so, to have a rosary bracelet that you wear, and especially one that you like to wear, one that's attractive, I think is very important for us. Or to have one that's meaningful that you keep in your pocket. I think that gets a little tougher, as it gets misplaced or whatever. Wearing one I think is practical, but if not, having one in your pocket somewhere that is with you, not just like in your purse or, you know, somewhere close by, like with you all the time, I think is really important because then every time you stick your hand in your pocket or every time, you go to fidget with it, it's that physical reminder. And I think very often when we start to get into this habit of praying in the quiet moments, little by little throughout the day, the first thought that we have is especially in the beginning, oh, I don't have time right now, or not, I don't feel like it, or not yet. But when we have that first thought, like, ah, oh, not right now, no, like stop ourselves and we can pray one Hail Mary. It only takes 10 seconds to pray a single Hail Mary. There's almost nothing that we're doing that can't wait just 10 seconds. And so by making that tiny progress, literally one bead at a time, really actually there's this very natural psychological kind of pattern that's built. We feel good about that success. One Hail Mary feels successful to us, and putting it off, even though we might think it's a good reason to put it off, is kind of like like we feel a little bit like a failure, like we failed to do it. And the success that we have by just making that even small progress fuels greater progress. And that's true with with athletes, or any kind of craft or skill that you're trying to learn. That little bit of progress encourages greater progress. And it really, in a spiritual sense, this is like loaves and fish. Everything that we give to the Lord is almost meaningless to him. He can do such great things. Even when we think we're doing something great, it's not much to the Lord, but we can really discredit our tiny offering. This messy rosary, this one simple Hail Mary, or we try to pray a family rosary and nobody pays attention, whatever it is, we really discredit this offering that we have. But when we really think about the story of the loaves and fish, there was a bunch of adults standing around trying to solve a very real problem. And this little boy comes up, perhaps like interrupting. How meaningless would it have seemed to these very logical adults to say, "Oh, I've got a couple loaves and fish." Obviously, like, every adult would say, "Okay, step aside, let the adult solve it." But it was his openness, his willingness to step up and just give what felt like nothing. And the Lord can do what he does best, and he multiplies. That's his job. He is the multiplier. And our job is just to give whatever we have, no matter how small, no matter how meaningless it seems, no matter how messy or interrupted or chaotic, we just give. And the Lord will multiply that. And that's true in our personal prayer life. It's true in our kind of family endeavors to pray together. All of that, the Lord really honors and will continue to multiply whatever it is that we give him.
So, just kind of wrapping that all up together, Shannon. You live your faith. You try and share it with your family, and you have a business. And as you're trying to live all of those things, at one time, side by side, what do you hope our listeners take away about the connection between prayer and the purpose of their life and just everyday holiness?
I think really keeping it simple. I think it's so easy for, especially us as women, to look at other people, to hear podcasts, to hear kind of, the highlights of my story, or to look at Instagram and to see, the snippets of other people's life, those highlighted, curated pictures that they share, and to feel really discouraged about how well we're doing or not doing, or, whether we have it together or not. We feel like, we never live up. And when we begin to kind of look outward at everybody else, we're missing really what's available for us interiorly. And the Lord is really calling each of us just to do the best with what we have in front of us. And we know that the highlights, of everybody's Instagram are not the reality. We know that, but it's hard. It can be hard to see. And especially for younger moms who are maybe just in the throes of raising their family. And, it just does feel like, the four walls are the entire world. It's everything. And it feels like every day it's not enough. Every day, you're exhausted, and every day you didn't pray enough, you didn't eat healthy enough, fill in the blank enough. And the reality is that nothing, doesn't matter how healthy our meals are or how many hours a day we pray, it isn't ever going to be enough. And we have to rely on the Lord because he is always lavishly more than enough. And so that trust, giving over even, our frustrations with ourselves, our, just like lack or weaknesses, or that we have a desire to be more like somebody, or the saints that we admire, we want to be like them. Even that desire, that we aren't there, that kind of cross of not being where we want to be or how we want to be, giving that over to the Lord is a tremendous gift. And that desire to be a better mom, to be a better cook, to be better at organizing, better at homeschool, all of these things, these desires, St. Therese said, the Lord is not capable of inspiring unrealizable desires. And so, even to have that desire, to know that we should do more, be better, whatever, those are all beautiful things that the Lord wants to grow in our lives, however slow it might be. But when we continue to persevere and giving that over to the Lord and really trusting that He plans to fulfill that desire for us. And that's a tremendous gift. And it helps us really also to trust more, to be little, and to continue to grow in that littleness when we feel our own gaps and our weaknesses. And I think in the day in and day out of our lives, there's going to be awesome days where, we get a lot of things right, but most of our days it's going to feel like there were more misses than wins. And all of it, through all of it, when we can just be in conversation with our Lord, with Our Lady, through all of that by praying the rosary little by little, it impacts our life, our outlook, our children, our spouses, all of our relationships, because everybody's, really picking up on that peace that we have, that peace that kind of comes from childlike faith and littleness. And, there's a lot of things that, especially in early motherhood that I set out to do that, you know, boxes I didn't check, things we never finished, all of those things. But by the grace of God, because no matter what, and, beginning and beginning again is a lot of, this faith journey too. Like there were days when, it was a total miss with the Lord. Like I wasn't in conversation, where I was crabby and whatever all day. But when we continued to begin again each day, leaning in, attempting to be littler and littler, our children learn that, they feel that. And, that becomes our conversation in the house. That's the way that we pray. And it just changes our culture in our family. It changes um, habits and, really for our kids, the trajectory of their lives when they can understand for themselves what this littleness really means.
Well, thank you, Shannon, for being with me on the Peak Day podcast, giving us all these wonderful nuggets of wisdom that you've learned along the way. Um, Tell us how to find your book, The Way of the Rosary, and then Choose Life.
Yeah. So the Way of the Rosary is available at chooselife.com, and that's spelled CHEWSLIFE, Choose Life. Um, and the book is also available from Ascension and soon to be available on Amazon. It's not there today, but it should be there soon. It's sold out currently, but it should be back. But yeah, purchases from Choose Life help support our family a little bit more than purchases at other places. So we appreciate that. But all of them, are wonderful ways, for you to get the book. And really, that's the important thing to me, is that you get that into your life because it's the real practical tool.
Well, thank you again, Shannon, for being on the podcast with me. I appreciate it so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me.